Hello and welcome to our weekly roundup of all things royal on TalkTV. So pop the kettle on. This is the Royal Tea. I'm Sarah Hewson. Coming up on the show today, the King's rallying call for Britain as he delivers a State of the Nation speech. And a Harry and Meghan house hunting in the UK. Plus, what would a move back across the Atlantic do for royal relations? Well, joining me today are the Evening Standard's royal editor, Robert Jobson, and the royal commentator, Emily Andrews. Hello to both of you.
Hi.
So, to that address from the King first, and King Charles took the time in a speech at Mansion House in London to reflect on what he says makes the UK so special. He called on Britons to draw upon the deep well of shared values, including tolerance and a duty of care for others. And he called for harmony at a time of international turmoil. Let's take a quick listen.
I have often described the United Kingdom as a community of communities, an island nation in which our shared values are the force which holds us together, reminding us that there is far, far more that unites us than divides us.
Emily, what does this speech and the substance of it tell us about the King?
Well, from a very sort of personal point of view, I thought it was a great speech. I thought it was packed full of interesting points. We were told that Charles had personally written it. It was a reflection for him on his first year as monarch, and he was thinking about, in particularly, what makes the UK great. I think one of the things that stood out for me was his sort of comment on social media, really. I mean, look, we are at a very tricky time in international relations with Israel and Gaza. And we saw with the attack on the Gazan hospital, Al-Hali hospital, and people were rushing to apportion blame on either side, particularly through social media. And I'm sure the King would have been aware of that when he said that, you know, in this kind of the chatter of social media and people rushing to condemn and the clamour on either side, we have to be more kind, be more tolerant, take a step back and think. And for me, that really, really resonated.
Yeah, because what he seemed to be saying, Robert, is we can disagree. We can have different opinions on this. But in the real world, we tend to do it with more civility. And in the online world, we seem to lose sight of that and it becomes very acrimonious.
Yeah, well, I think I agree wholeheartedly with Emily. I think that it showed the King's status and his growing confidence in the role as well, following the trip to France where he made a major speech there as well. This one I thought had a lot more about it. It was certainly very personal, and I thought that he was basically right, wasn't he, saying that I think ever since Brexit, I think that everybody seems to get so entrenched in a view and that and they don't want to listen to another person's point of view, whereas, you know, that's the whole point of a free society and democracy, is that you can all speak and have different opinions. And he absolutely nailed it. I think that, you know, also that he was talking about the British sense of humour too and things like that.
Which he poked fun at himself,
and
didn't he? The
which
pen.
I thought was quite funny that he did that. He didn't look particularly like he was enjoying it at the time, but
No.
and nor did his bodyguard or anybody else or the private secretary. But I thought it was a very good speech. But I think it shows you that since, you know, over a year that he's been in the role now, that he's certainly grown into the role. And I got a sense, even when I was at a job, which we're going to talk about later, in the city the other day, that there's a different feel about him being king than when he was Prince of Wales. He's listened to more.
Yeah, there was a lot of chat when he was Prince of Wales, and obviously the longest-serving Prince of Wales, about whether he would be able to be a campaigning king in the same way that he had been as Prince of Wales. We haven't heard much from him in terms of substance and meat, I would say, in the last year. But this speech, for me, showed that he could still tell us his opinion, tell us his thoughts and feelings. We know he's an emotional man.
He's a very deep-thinking, deep-feeling man,
exactly.
isn't he?
He could tell us his feelings and tell us his thoughts,
I think he said
but in a
lot
very,
but
toe that governmental presidential line.
But I think he did in Germany and he did in France speak. There was elements of his personal views there, and you know, when he said, "As I'm going to do what I can do to foster good relations with France," and when he talked about Ukraine as well in Germany. So I think we wouldn't necessarily have got that same sense from Her late Majesty, that she wouldn't necessarily do that. And I think that was the character. But with this king, he is going to go that little bit extra. He's going to push the boundaries. And I think the country's better for it, because politically we have so many, conflicting views. It's good to have that sort of paternal viewpoint. I'm saying let's all be kind to each other.
Yes.
That's essentially what he was saying.
And no one else is saying that.
He wasn't alone at the event, of course. He had Queen Camilla by his side, and she stole the show with a touching tribute to her late mother-in-law, Queen Elizabeth. She wore the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, which was the late Queen's favourite, for the first time since her death. She was also wearing a Bruce Oldfield dress that she'd worn in Germany at the state banquet on their first state visit since the King's accession to the throne. How comfortable do you think she is becoming in these situations, Emily?
I thought she looked radiant. I loved also the necklace, the diamond necklace and bracelet she wore, a present from, I think, it's a South African bracelet and necklace, which was also a favourite of the Queen's. I love the story behind the tiara. It was actually a wedding present to Queen Mary in 1896. And many women in Great Britain and Ireland subscribed to buy this wedding gift for Queen Mary, which is why it's called the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara. It really suited Camilla. She looks very good, I think, in formal wear. She hasn't always appeared that comfortable in these very formal, very public events. We know that really what she likes to do is to go back to Raymil House, kick off her heels, roast a chicken and have a glass of red wine.
While watching Strictly.
Whilst watching Strictly, exactly, with her family beside her. But I think she, as Rob and I have said in the past, she is such an asset to the King, and she seems much more comfortable now with being cool queen, being dressed as a queen, and in these very important events at Mansion House, which was the city's welcome to the monarchs since their accession.
And just on that, the history of this event, it dates back to the 17th century.
Yeah, everyone. It's hard to imagine, but when you see them all dressed in their, the Lord Mayor and his finery and all this sort of stuff, you can imagine that it hasn't changed that much. But no, I mean, it's a very important event, and I think that the King made sure that it was well trailed, his speech, and unlike some speeches that are trailed, I think it lived up to it, and I think he knew it was history we would be watching, and he wanted to make sure that. He was comparable to his forebears.
A speech of substance. That wasn't Charles's only royal engagement this week, as he met African business leaders ahead of a state visit to Kenya next month. Idris Elba was in attendance, as was our own Robert Jobson. Robert, tell us about the event.
Well, it is an important event ahead of the trip to Kenya. It was held and hosted by the Prince's Trust International. And a lot of bigwigs were there that supported the charity. It was a meeting of the Africa Advisory Council that he had. So there was Oswald Boateng was there, as well as Idris Elba and other people, trying to basically see what solutions they could come up with to help the terrible, the chronic unemployment of youth unemployment in Africa. And what opportunities there were for entrepreneurship and things like that. He just didn't really want to speak. I mean, he was the first person to greet the King as he walked into the old chapel garrison.
And the significance of Idris Elba being there, that he was helped by the Prince's
Well, he got
Trust.
a £1,500 grant, I think, to go and train at the local theatre group, and from there he developed. And Idris has been a big supporter of the Prince's Trust, and now the Prince's Trust International ever since. I mean, I tried to get an interview with him, but he didn't really want to chat. So I
saw you coming.
What? He said no to you, Rob?
But I just spent most of the time saying how wonderful he was as DCI, Luther. So, I mean, that was it. But then I said, now can we chat about this? And no.
He wasn't fighting.
But it was a round table discussion, so, he was contributing to that. So I think he didn't really want him to be the focus. In other words, yes, he saw me coming. Yeah.
To Harry and Meghan now, and reports that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex could be set for a return to UK shores, with speculation that Harry has been house hunting in London. It is thought the couple are split on the idea of a move, but could buy a property themselves rather than stay on the royal estate. Robert, is there any truth in these rumours? They're not really going to be coming back to the UK, are they?
I think, Sarah, that it would be a push if they did. But, I mean, the reality is I think this comes from this whole story, which was a bit of a, what's the best way, polite way to put it? The story about him and the Council of State and that he needs to have a base in
to maintain his position as
But, I mean, we
Councillor
all
of State.
know that the chances of him stepping in for the King are very, very slim. Look, I actually personally think that, I can see why Harry would want a base here. This was pretty embarrassing last time he came over to do the well-being child thing, and then there was the whole problem about where is he going to stay, what's he going to do, is he with the King? And so I think I can see a reason for him. I just don't see that, from what we hear, Meghan's in the slightest bit interested in coming to the UK. I think she's made her mind up. She's going to base where she is and is happy where she is.
Yeah, we hear that she's very happy in California, and I think it's very notable that she didn't come to the UK for the coronation. She didn't come to the UK when Harry visited for the Whale Child Awards in September. She flew straight to Germany. Harry does want to maintain his contacts with British charities, like Whale Child and the Diana Award. But from what I hear, Meghan has either been dropped or she's dropped any of the UK patronages that she had while she was here, like the Mayhew Animal Foundation or the charity that dresses women, Smartworks.
Smartworks, yeah.
So she doesn't have any UK charity links. And I can see that Harry may want to buy something here for his work. We know
He is British. I mean,
he's British. He's British, and also he's very, very concerned about security, and so that's a big factor for him.
Well, then that's a factor. If they're buying somewhere off a royal estate, if they're buying somewhere themselves, then security comes into play, doesn't it?
Personally, I think it was really poor form. I know Jobbo might hit me for this, but I thought it was really, I thought it was really poor form from the royal family and from Charles. For Harry asked to stay somewhere on the royal estate, Windsor Castle perhaps, because, then he could go to St George's. It was the anniversary of the Queen's death. And he was told no, because there were no staff, which I'm sorry, as we know, is ridiculous. He was told that he could go to Balmoral/Burke Hall. I think the King was in residence at Balmoral at that point.
He was,
But, which would have been lovely, but they couldn't make the schedules work. OK, fine. But what,
well, I mean, it's his son. I mean, there's Clarence House down the road.
Exactly, there's Clarence House, Frogmore Cottage is still empty. There's Clarence House, there's Windsor Castle. There's even apartments at Buckingham Palace. It is still being renovated. But there were places where Harry could have stayed and would have been protected. And I just thought it was really poor form that the King didn't make that happen for him.
And aside from needing a base for when he comes over to here for work or for his position as Councillor of State, what about the family? What about the children growing up in California, not knowing their British family, not knowing their cousins, their similar
torn
ages?
On this, I'm sure the King is torn on this. Whenever he speaks, he always speaks about being a father, a grandfather. I'm sure he's torn on this.
We're always told the door is always open.
The door is open. I think he is.
But only if Harry makes the first move through it.
Yeah, but not even that. I think that the issue will be Queen Camilla and Prince William. I think that there's a real... What happened in the book that he wrote, Spare, about his father, I don't think the King came out that badly, actually, to be honest. But I do think that William did, and I think Camilla did. And I think that the King, quite rightly, has taken that offence on what was said about his
wife and his elder son.
And William too. But I'm sure, like any dad, that really he must be very torn on this, and that he's not really seeing other grandchildren, and that's sad.
Really sad. He's only met Lilibet, Princess Lily, once, which was last May when Harry and Meghan and the children came over for the Platinum Jubilee. As we understand it, William, Kate and their 3 children have not even met Lily. And that's very sad, I think, for Archie.
You also have to remember that the King himself, and we all seem to forget, he did the Dimbleby interview, he did the Dimbleby book. He pretty much said, I remember the time very much at the time that the Duke of Edinburgh was furious about what was said about him. And so this isn't, what Harry has done. We all sit in a modern way with Netflix and all that was available to him. Is it that different from the Dimbleby documentary and the Dimbleby book, in where the King actually, as Prince of Wales, was very critical of his mum and dad,
and his schooling,
to the degree that Princess Anne, disagreed with him and went in the defence. So You can see it from other point of view.
Now, after the trailer for the final series of The Crown was released last week, we've now had our first look at Elizabeth Debicki as Princess Diana during her final days. The series will cover the death of the late Princess of Wales, and Prince William is reportedly disgusted at her apparent portrayal. Emily, The Crown has been controversial for quite some time now, but this, as it gets closer and closer and gets to the point of the death of Princess Diana, how difficult is that going to be for members of the royal family?
Well, I think officially we're always told by the press officers that they don't watch it, but we know that actually that they did. Certainly the first series was watched by Philip and the late Queen Elizabeth, and he was furious at his portrayal at kind of his mother and various things about the death of some of his family. I doubt that William will be watching The Crown. Why would you? It's a very, very, very painful time in his life. He was 15 when his mother died. And I am slightly torn in a personal capacity. I kind of think it should be drama, should be allowed. It is drama. And now, of course, The Crown have been forced by some kind of newspaper campaigns to put this disclaimer on the front saying this is based on real events, but it is not actually reality, it's a drama, which I think is probably helpful to younger viewers who might not have lived through the events as old-timers like me and Rob did. But on the other hand, I think that it must be very painful for the family to have it all rehashed again. I was reminded actually of the Dyson report, which was the Lord Dyson did the report into the Panorama interview that Princess Diana gave to Martin Bashir. And afterwards, William came out very strongly and said that Panorama interview should never be shown again. But I kind of felt that William was wrong, actually, because it was denying his mother a voice. She was an icon of our time, and in a way that very, very few women are. Marilyn Monroe, perhaps even Queen Elizabeth. And I feel that actually her story is one that should be talked about and thought about. And is The Crown a way for people to find out more about that, younger people?
I mean, as long as people understand that this is fiction and there are large parts of this, particularly the dialogue, when we see Diana coming back as a ghost and speaking to the then Queen, speaking to Prince Charles, then that's okay. We've also got a new play coming out. I think it's next month, the end of this month.
About the Panorama.
About the Panorama interview, called The Interview, written by Jonathan Maitland, a former BBC and ITV journalist. And that suggests in that Diana was coached over a long period of time by Martin Bashir with some of the answers that she gave.
Sure she was.
She wanted, I mean, the thing about the Bashir thing, look, we've got Dyson's report. I think it's obvious that Diana did want to speak. She wanted to give an interview. She was courted. She was courted by all the US networks. It wasn't a question of her giving an interview. It was to whom was she going to speak.
And what she was going to say.
She went to see editors before and tried to get to do the same thing with editors. She went to Max Hastings. Look, I totally agree with you, Emily, but I do think that to deny her a voice is totally wrong because, I mean, I was reporting at the time. And Diana, you know, this was one of her only ways that she could get to escape. And she wanted to get her point of view across. And, you know, at this moment in her life, that's how she felt.
But
so
the point made by Lord Dyson in his report was she felt that way at that point in her life because of the deception.
No, but that's a bigger jump. That's a big assumption by Lord Dyson.
It is.
Because I know that she was trying to get that.
But what about the
out.
false documents that she'd been presented with, for example, that suggested
that
that Charles had had an affair?
That was abhorrent. That was abhorrent.
All of that is wrong, okay? And it was bad. It was bad what he did. I mean, I believe that Diana, at that particular juncture in her life, wanted a voice. She wanted to get out, and she wanted to make sure that she had her viewpoints across. After the Charles documentary and interview with Dimbleby, she wanted to make a point.
Well, interesting.
And I think she was very clear about that. And actually, a lot of people sort of try to paint this holier-than-thou image of Diana. Diana was a very strong, intelligent woman.
Yes.
And she knew what she was doing. She knew she had to be deceptive to her own private secretary, to her own bodyguards. She actually wanted to get a voice. And that's, I think, you can't rewrite history. This is part of history.
Agreed. But at the same time, she also had paranoias about what was going on in her husband's private life. And this Martin Bashir, as has now been found, played on those paranoia.
She did, Sarah, have paranoids. But that word paranoia, that was something that there was very much two camps in those days. I remember it. And they were all trying to say that Diana was barking mad or whatever.
Crazy.
But she was presented with false evidence that he'd had an affair and got piggy leg
absolutely
booked.
True what you're saying. So that's all of it. That's all of it is true. But the fact is, she would laugh about things. I mean, I know I wrote a book with Ken Wall for a Bodyguard, and where everyone was trying to dismiss her as this sort of mad character, paranoid, and all this.
That's doing her a disservice.
She really is doing a disservice, because she was a terribly funny person. She would mock herself about things like this. She would, she knew what was going on around her. And let's face it, she wasn't wrong most of the time.
I think all of us, all humans are flawed. We all have human fragility. And I do subscribe to this view that it's really patronising and demeaning to say that Princess Diana was some cowed little woman who was convinced to do this interview by this wicked Martin Bashir, and the evidence was, Tiggy Leg Bork or the stuff that was put upon, that was told to her brother, that Bashir, to try and force her to do the interview. Yes, that might have meant that she went, but she probably would have gone to the Beeb anyway, because the BBC is kind of, our state broadcaster, and authenticity and certainly that time audience. She wanted to get her message out there. She'd done it through through slightly sort of, the back passage through Diana Hirth, True Story, and Andrew Morton. This time, she wanted her voice heard. She was sick of being told by the palace, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't say this, you can't say that.
And it also meant she could get the divorce she wanted, because that was when the Queen said enough.
Yeah.
Because until that moment, there was a lot of faffing around her. She was gradually being sidelined. And, I met Diana many times, covered the story many times, and she could get quite upset about stories if you've written, and she'd tick you off. But she was as sharp as a tack. She was very clever, and she wasn't media. She was media savvy. She knew how to organise things to make herself look good.
She had been for a long time.
She was clever, and I think that people now, even William, he was a boy at the time, they forget that she knew what she was doing, and she was sharp.
And actually, while we say, William has implored that it never be shown again, actually, it was shown in Harry and Meghan's Netflix series.
Yes, and it's interesting whether, I did wonder when William made that statement and we didn't really hear anything from Harry, I did wonder whether, again, this was another source of dissension from the two boys, because we know from the statue in Kensington Palace Gardens that took so long because they just couldn't decide, and about the sculpture.
It just seems to me, though, we're saying it should never be shown again. It was a historic moment.
Yeah, it's a historic
Can we imagine
document.
if Elizabeth I had given a TV interview, and then we decide,
they didn't want the royal family documentary to be shown again.
No, but I mean, go back in real history. Go back to the Tudor times. Imagine Elizabeth I or Henry. They've given a TV interview. No, we mustn't watch that because it upset people at the time. It's history. We should be allowed to see first-person history. Yes, maybe with a disclaimer saying this happened and shouldn't have happened. But the fact is, it did.
I think if Diana had pulled her punch, with the benefit of hindsight, I think if Diana had pulled her punches slightly, if she'd involved Patrick Jefferson, her private secretary, and perhaps had a little bit more thought and care, and hadn't
it wouldn't have happened.
No, and hadn't said, Charles wasn't fit for the top job, if she'd been a bit more Colleen Rooney about it, actually, and been a bit more kind of, well, I mean, I was very, it was very difficult for me, but of course I respect my husband, more that kind of tone, I think perhaps there would have been, I think perhaps...
Would it have then had
but that's not the
impact that it's had?
That's not the Spencer way.
Not the Spencer way.
No, the rapier thrust.
The rapier thrust and the grenade exploding.
Earl Spencer at the funeral. And I think that you could easily say that Harry has a lot of Spencer.
He's definitely a Spencer.
And finally, we've been seeing a lot of the Prince and Princess of Wales of late, but with the half-term holidays arriving, they're expected to step away from the spotlight briefly to spend some time with their children and put family first. We saw them last weekend, William attending a Rugby World Cup game with George, Kate also in France for the England match, William and George Welsh match, but they've been very prominent with their various different engagements, but it's time to take a bit of a step back.
Well, I think, you know, Kate and William have made it very clear right from the birth of Prince George that they would always prioritise their family, and they've always, ever since the children have started school, they've always taken every half term. The kids go to private school, so they get 2 weeks in the autumn. In fact, I was looking at, today I was looking at Kate's first public engagement in the autumn, and there was a gap. I think the last email I got from KP Press Office was something like the 7th of July, and then the next one was the 3rd of September.
And it was like hit the ground running.
Hit the ground running.
Kids are back at school.
Kids are back at school, we must get all the engagements in. Look, I think most modern parents, if they could, most people are not as lucky as William and Kate, or Catherine, as we should now call her. Most modern parents, if they could, would try and organise their work around their children's schedules. And I think William and Kate are very appreciative that they have the privilege to do so. You know, George is going to be the next king. Charlotte and Louis are going to play prominent positions as in being, you know, working members, we think still, in the royal family. So it's right that William and Catherine should put as much time as they can into having a happy family life.
And Robert, I mean, you talked about Charles and the King and his descriptions of his childhood, and actually his parents were absent for large periods of it. Now we have the Princess of Wales able to make the choice that she doesn't go to Singapore to the Earthshot Prize because she wants to be there to support her son in his exams.
And I think that was the right move. And also I think that what's happening here too is with such a limited number of royals, we're seeing more and more of Catherine doing solo engagements. You get more, a chance for the royals to do their engagements that way. And William, Earthshot, that's really his gig. And so he goes over there. And I was in New York when he was doing the pre-launch. And, you know, it was all about him and it was about Earthshot. It wasn't about what Kate was wearing and whatever. And so I think that, in a way, they're trying to focus on what they do. And although she has supported him with the Earthshot Prize, I think he probably wants it to be more about the event and less about and this is a convenient way of doing that, and also making sure that their kids, which is a priority, get their time with their mum and dad. And
George doing some big exams coming up, the independent schools version of the 11 plus, effectively. What do we know about where he is set to head?
Well, I think there was a passerby candid picture of him and the Prince and Princess of Wales with the Provost of Eton, I think in the summer. And we know that for George's year, William and Catherine had to have applied by the end of June this year for Eton, which starts...
It'll be 2026 he'll
Year 9. For those of us who don't go to public school, that's year 9. He'll go when he's 13 to Eton. So we think that Eton's definitely in the mix. Of course, that's where William went, that's where Harry went. And also don't forget that the Queen, Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen, technically went to Eton because she was taught by the Provost at Eton when she was at Windsor Castle. She didn't actually attend the school. So there's a lot of royal history there, and it's very close to Windsor. Eton is still a boarding school, but perhaps by 2025 they might allow some day, or they might do flexi boarding so that George can still go home to Adelaide Cottage on the Windsor estate, but mum and dad are still very close. Apparently, they're also looking at Marlborough.
Looking at mixed school options.
Yeah, mixed school options, because they've got Charlotte and Louis to think about. Marlborough, of course, is where Kate went latterly. It wasn't her first secondary school, and she was very, very happy there.
Well, that is all we've got time for this week. My thanks to Emily and Robert. And if you want to join in with the debate, make sure you leave a comment. We will be back next week with all of the latest on the royal family. Hope you can join us. We'll see you then.